We're back.
Back. All right, so we're back. And as we promised you, we have the minister with us, the Minister Dolores Balderamas Garcia, who is in the Ministry of Human Development. Minister, good morning, and it's good to have you this morning.
Good morning to you young people. Good to see you.
Not as young and vibrant as you are, as you seem this morning. So thank you for being here. As we said earlier, we have you on set to discuss with us some changes in legislation that has to do with juvenile justice. We know this is a...
We also have Starla.
Oh, right. Sorry, the technology, the Zoom. And so we also have Starla Bradley with us. Earlier I introduced her as the Director of Human Development. However, I want to make a correction that she's actually the Director of the Community Rehabilitation Department. Starla, of course, I'm not forgetting you. Good morning, Ms. Starla Bradley.
Good morning, Marlene and Paul. Good morning, Minister Dolores.
Good morning.
Good morning, Belize.
Good morning. All right, so Minister, this is obviously a very important conversation. So let's start off with perhaps giving us just a general overview of some of these changes that we can expect.
Surely, well, thank you very much, and we do think it's important. But perhaps I should start with an acknowledgement of all the people who have helped and who have worked to bring us to this point. Because at our National Commission for Families and Children, we have had people working on this for years. We have had input from the Attorney General's Ministry. We have had input from partners. We have had input, of course, from our Executive Director, Ms. Margaret Nicholas. And it's brought us to this point where we felt, Starla in particular, felt that it's time for us to move to make the change. And it really is a big paradigm shift. So we're proud to have come to this moment. The House meeting won't be this morning, it'll be tomorrow. But what has brought us to this point, Paul and Marlene, is that it is really high time for us to move to a different approach to our children in need of care and who are exhibiting vulnerabilities, rather than saying they have uncontrollable behavior and say, and the parents say, well, I can't handle it, so send in a hostel, send in a mile 21. It almost sounds like you send somebody back a Baptist. Because, well, you know what was back a Baptist, not true? I'm back,
No.
you see, Paul is young. Back a Baptist, the old jail, the Belize City, man,
Oh,
jail
really?
lane.
Okay.
We still have a jail lane, you know.
Yeah.
Yes, well, so almost like sending a child back a Baptist. So we said, no, that is not the approach. Vulnerabilities that exhibit themselves in what used to be called uncontrollable behavior need attention. And we felt that it's really the time to come forward with the legislation to repeal the Certified Institutions Act and replace it with the approach that comes and the whole shift that comes with a residential care facility. So we're in that process now, and it is now a matter of changing the legislation. And there are two consequential pieces of legislation that go with this, and that is the amendment to the Juvenile Offenders Act and the amendment to the Families and Children's Act, which will actually change the name in those bits of legislation from certified institution, because that will be gone, and moving it now to residential care facility. I have to tell you, the Certified Institutions Act is old, something like 90 years old.
Wow.
So it's time. It's time that we make that change, you know. And maybe Starla would like to add.
Yeah.
Yes.
So go ahead, Starla.
Right, Minister was saying our laws date back to the 1930s. The Juvenile Offenders Act dates back to 1936, and the Certified Institutions Act, which governs the youth hostel itself, dates back to 1939. What we're doing essentially, and which is of great importance, is that we're removing status offenses Status offenses are offenses that only children are charged with. Adults can't be charged with a status offense. And really, status offenses are red flags. They're really protection issues, parenting issues. They're red flags that indicate that something is wrong. But what our system has been doing is we've been penalizing the child. If you look at the Juvenile Offenders Act, Section 14, it has a child can be charged for begging or for not having a parent or guardian or for wandering or for residing in a house with a prostitute. You can see how antiquated these laws are, right? So we're really moving to remove these completely and implement a more rights-based approach to engaging with children and their parents.
Now, this is a challenging time to be having this conversation because if we put it into where we are today, there is a clamor from the society to be able to address the crime situation in the country. And we have seen where children have been recruited to gangs and in fact now are perpetrators of whether it's attempted murder or murder. And the question is, how do we ensure that those who do commit offenses like this will face consequences versus some of the things that you're speaking of, whether it's wandering or begging?
Yes. Maybe I could start by saying, and I'm sure Starla will back it up, maybe I could start by saying that the majority of the children in care are there for vulnerabilities that have nothing to do with criminal behavior. Of course, there's the Wagner's facility at the prison, which is for the serious offenders who are underage. Now, the age of criminal responsibility in Belize is 12. And we're kind of high middle, if you could put it that way. In some parts of the Caribbean, it's as low as 7. And in some parts of Latin America, it can go up to 14 and 16. So we're kind of in the middle. And I guess for now, we can be happy that we're not too very low. But I do want to stress that the minority of kids at the hostel are there for minor offenses like stealing or something like that. So we are looking, yes, at the society and keeping everybody safe and as crime-free as possible, even though we can see it's going up. But we want to take an approach of helping children and families. We have the name families in the ministry right now, and we really wish to help children and families to do that level of rehabilitation. Starla has been excellent in guiding us, as she says, to the rights-based approach that we wish to take. So I think, yes, she'd like to add.
Yes, certainly adding to what Minister just said. Indeed, the more serious offenses, the murders, attempted murders, those are the ones that we hear about more often in the media, and those are the ones that have a greater impact on society. But when you look at the data, those are the smallest numbers. The perception is that, yes, minors are the ones committing the crimes, and that's what's being portrayed in the media, but the reality is those high-risk offenders are the minority. Majority of the kids who come in conflict with the law are for lesser offenses and more minor offenses. So the criminal justice system itself doesn't say that children should get a slap on the wrist. It should hold the child accountable. If you've committed an offense, there's a consequence for every behavior. And it's a system that tries to hold them accountable, yes, but it provides every opportunity to try to rehabilitate, right? Of course, high risk, those kids who are high risk, those who are gang involved, who may have started early in that life, they are, of course, harder. They're much more difficult to work with. And they usually end up at the Wagner's Youth Facility, because the youth hostel is an open facility. It's not for high-risk offenders, right? So this approach, you're looking at a continuum. The children who end up in Wagner's, the major percentage of them do have come from difficult circumstances, come from disruptive families, have many challenges. And so what this approach does is that we're trying to intervene much earlier, and prevent that from happening, preventing them from ending up in the prison. What we're seeing is that the current system, parents can simply go to the court and indicate to the magistrate that they cannot control their child. And if the magistrate believes that parent and they make a good enough case on the what the parent has said, the magistrate, and we have seen it many times, magistrates would commit these children to the youth hostel till the age of 18.
Yeah.
And that is being done without the benefit of any intervention. I have to say that over the years, with a lot of advocacy, it's now only a few magistrates who would do something like this, send a child directly. The practice is that they would refer them to the community rehabilitation department. So what we're doing now, by changing this legislation, we're taking it out completely, so the parent cannot go to the court and seek to put their child within the institution. Instead, that will be removed completely. So they will then be referred to the department, where we will do our best to institute a range of interventions to try to impact the child and the parent, the family.
And I think that's really the core of the issue here that we need to understand. We don't always know the stories behind the children that are in institutions like the youth hostel, which will be renamed and no longer be a certified institution, but now a
residential care
facility.
And perhaps Paul and Marlene, if you'd allow me to add, we visited in early January. And what I found appalled me. So basically, I vowed, and along with the support of everyone, I said, look, we've got to make this change. So not only did we really look at the physical infrastructure, fixing up the bathrooms for the girls, which was in terrible condition, and also for the boys. I mean, they were backing bucket to flush toilet and things like that. So all the plumbing has been fixed. New furnitures, the bathrooms fixed up. They do have a nice big TV now in the girls and boys section. And guess what? They mind the TV, because they want to watch their programs. So they won't break that up, But we did say, look, we're going to make these changes not only to the physical infrastructure, but also to the systemic difficulties that were being suffered. Now, it does still remind people of a bit of a prison-like facility, because we do have to have security.
Well,
and so the dorms do have to have the locks and things like that. But we really have taken a different approach. We have a program officer now. Not that nothing had happened before, but we have beefed it up. And looking at the systemic changes, this is where we went back to get the advice from all our people at NCFC and Starla's department in particular. And we said, look, rights-based approach, interventions that will help children to reintegrate and get back. And then also, the approach that we're trying to take right now is to work with parents. So we really don't want the parents to be saying, this is a place that I can, if I'm having the least bit of trouble, this is where the child must go. Hostel should be, as much as we're trying to change it and look nice with pretty furniture and everything that I would love to have in my own home, hostel should be a last resort, and for the shortest period of time. By the way, the numbers change, because we have sometimes unaccompanied migrant minors and that kind of thing. So the numbers do change. And we do have to have a good amount of staff, because you have to have relief officers and that kind of thing. But we're happy to say that some of the programs are really working. We have a tailor there now. We have all kinds of other interventions, for which I think we can feel we can feel positive about it.
I think that, and I really would love to hear a bit more. The last time you were here, Minister, I did ask about this very same issue about
Yes.
uncontrollable behavior. And Starla would know that I am aware that this has been a lobby
Right,
for
for a long time.
many, many years. And if we break it down, it is essentially punishing children for a breakdown in parenting, lack of parenting due to circumstances and many other things. A 15-year-old is deemed, or 14-year-old deemed uncontrollable and put in the hostel sometimes till they age out. They turn 18 and they're on their own.
Right.
Never visited by parents. They've done nothing wrong in terms of breaking laws. So we have seen this become a way for people essentially to rid themselves of the responsibility of parenting. But my question has to be, so being able to get to the point where we can repeal this portion of the legislation, as Starla said, you worked with magistrates to help them not do it, but now they won't even have the option to put them in hostel. How difficult was it to be able to get us to this point, since there's been lobbying for it for so many years?
I think I'll ask Starla to come in on that.
Indeed, it has been a long road.
Yeah.
I think decades, because it started even before I came on board, and I've been with the department for 11 years. So I think in some instances there was apprehension, was the timing right? And the time is now, because Minister Balderramos has really become a champion for this. She has taken it and put it at the forefront. And quite honestly, that's what we needed. Someone to take it and champion it and push it to the next level.
Yeah.
And so she would call the AG's ministry and call anybody she needed to call to tell them, hey, this needs to be a priority. Now we've worked on this. We've done a lot of significant work. In some instances, we really had to go back to the drawing board. We had to go back to the drawing board twice in terms of doing drafting instructions. So it's really been a huge learning experience. But in terms of the key stakeholders, in terms of the magistrates and other persons, other members of like the Child Justice Committee who are advocates, they have been advocates from day one.
Yeah.
So the support in that arena has always been there. We don't see it being difficult making the transition. We are in the process right now of we have draft protocols in place that for the magistracy, for the Community Rehabilitation Department, and for Department of Human Services, and the police, the main agencies that would interface and this change would impact the most. And so we have these draft protocols that we're working to finalize, but already the magistrates court, especially the family court in Belize City, they have been sending persons to us, even though it is an option. So in that regard, we're formalizing a practice that we've worked very hard to advocate for. And so the challenge will be working with the families. One of the challenges, of course, like what you mentioned, Marlene, we would say that parents tend to abdicate their parental responsibilities. And when the child has done the work and done an awesome job of making strides in a different direction, and we're trying to reintegrate them, the parent doesn't want, the parent is unforgiving, the parent doesn't want to deal with them. And currently there's nothing in the law that we can use to hold them accountable. So the changes, besides the repeal of the Certified Institutions Act, the Families and Children's Act will be adjusted. There will be minor amendments there so that community rehabilitation officers will be able to petition the court, much like on the other side of the child protection system where we have supervision and care orders for children who have been abused and neglected. Our officers will be able to seek supervision orders or care orders for the children as a last resort. But what this does, we can then seek conditions to be attached to these types of orders.
Yes.
And so we can ask the magistrate to have the parent engage in counseling or parenting support sessions or whatever interventions that after we have assessed the situation, we deem necessary to create that change that we want to see, not just in the child, but in the environment as well. So it is a shift. Some elements we have been doing already. We will just now everyone will just now be forced to implement all the way.
Now let me ask, I want to tap into that one a bit more, because where we talk about working with families, instead of just institutionalizing children, that's a huge component. But family reparation, repairing a family, comes at a cost, and it is very time consuming. So I want to ask you, Minister, about the support that is attached to the shift in legislation. I empathize with you having the monumental task of human development and working with families in addition to your other portfolios, because very often people look at society and say, well, you know, what are we going to do? But usually you have a strained budget.
Of course.
I've talked many times on this show of how our social workers are overworked. They have so many cases, more cases than they can handle. So when you add the element of a child that a parent would have said is uncontrollable, not not following rules, breaking rules, going to hostel, and now you say you're going to work with them. Sometimes it means financial resources. It means in helping the parent learn to cope, which is a process, and even offering things like housing and other stuff.
Precisely. I am so glad the conversation has kind of segued to this very important topic, Paul and Marlene and Starla, because as Starla was talking, the thing I was thinking about was the crime situation, which you brought up before. And basically, in cabinet and government now, we are looking at what we can do to provide better wraparound services to address the crime situation. We've almost lost a generation because it's been so long and we haven't really addressed the crime situation, especially on the south side of Belize City. What we were doing is really looking at how we can begin the process of maybe raising another generation to stay out of crime. And our senior managers, of which Starla is one, actually looked at the real input that is needed from the Ministry of Human Development and raising the profile of the Ministry of Human Development in everything that needs to happen in reducing crime, not just looking at education or the police or youth or whatever, but actually bringing human development to the center of the responses that we absolutely must make. And actually our staff, in terms of a project that we would like to do on the south side of Belize City, actually came up with a budget for human development interventions of close to $2 million. Just for an initial, and we are in serious discussion at this time to try to put this project onto the ground and roll it out properly. Now, what we're talking about is a huge amount of assessment of families who are in need and a huge amount of counseling staff. So basically, of course, I'll have to go and lobby, but basically what we are saying is we need to have our counselors. We need to have our social workers who are actually going to get really on the ground and make this kind of intervention. Because it is not acceptable, as has been stressed so far. It's not acceptable to put children away when there's a little bit of trouble, nor is it acceptable to have children running out on the street, not in school. This is the purpose of programs like Boost and Boost Plus. But the Boost Plus is more of the wraparound service, in addition to the conditional cash transfer that says, keep your children in school, make sure they're immunized. And I know Starla has vast experience in this regard, so she might want to talk a little bit more about that. But I am so glad that we brought the conversation around, almost full circle, in terms of what we really need to do to improve the situation.
Fixing the issues, it's not fast, one, and it's not cheap either.
Not at all.
But I think all agree it's absolutely necessary. And Minister, you know, you've been in politics long enough, and investing in people, while it's great in the speeches that we give, when election time comes, you can't talk about that family that you saved. It has very little impact compared to counting number of streets.
Precisely.
And so we have seen this happen for so many years, and now we have the effects of it within our society.
Now is
so
the
you
time
feel
to address
confident that you'll be able to get the backing from this administration to help to change these, or to work on the social issues that we're facing?
Well, I'm not going to bring the conversation to politics, because what's done is done and the past is in the past. And as I was saying to Starla when we were chatting, I said, Starla, fret not thyself because of evildoers. Let us focus now on what we can do going forward. And I am confident, with the help of Starla, Sean Vargas, who is now at the head of the Human Services Department, also Miss Anna Williams, our social planner, Miss Jewel, and of course, our National Commission for Families and Children, the National Women's Commission. We have really, and if I must say so myself, to blow our horn, we have some excellent staff. We have some very dedicated people.
All veterans to social work. Every single name I know.
We have some really, really good people. And now is the time for us not to look so much at the past, but what we can do now. Not only to raise the profile of human development and bring it to the center of all of our developmental activities, but to really roll out the Southside Project, perhaps declare it, as the Prime Minister has said, perhaps declare it as a special zone for development in looking at crafts and arts, putting children in good activities that they can really make a difference with, helping the moms, helping the dads. You know, UNICEF said the other day that only 24% of children grow up with a male figure, a father figure in the family. There is just so much that we can look at, but there is even more to do, you know. Maybe Starla could add here.
Thank you, Minister. Yes, certainly. I think that when we look at the vision, tying it back to juvenile justice now, when we look at the vision for any good juvenile justice system, we actually want to flip the system completely. Right now, a lot of focus is on secondary and tertiary prevention, meaning that children who have already interfaced with the law, or those who are in institutions and we're trying to rehabilitate. And we'll do our best to continue working with those children there. But the focus needs to be on primary prevention, where we are working with families, where we are doing early childhood stimulation, where we are mitigating those risks, where we are trying to minimize the traumas that children experience, you know, and that impact them as they get older. So we want to flip the script. We want to have a juvenile justice system where we can actually close down the youth hostel. I mean, I would love for that to happen because it won't be needed. Where we will have programs and services that keep children and adolescents positively engaged, you know, that they don't enter the juvenile justice system formally. So these types of services that look at the family and try to strengthen the family's ability to take care of its children are key. And so I'm glad that Minister, actually I like the fact that the name families is in the name of the ministry now, because it's at the core of what we do. And even when we work with an adolescent who has come in conflict with the law, we can't work with them in isolation. We have to work with the family. So that is at the core, and all of the wraparound services. And what Minister mentioned, I agree. We have an awesome team at the Ministry of Human Development, and we will do the best that we can. But the other entities, the other ministries, they have to come on board, because our interventions only go so far. We can be helping with the psychosocial, but what about housing?
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
Yes.
we can help with certain levels of skills training or keeping kids in school, but what about the job opportunities? So all other entities, all other ministries have a role to play in really addressing the core issues that really lend to crime and violence later on.
Would you, Ms. Bradley, would you speak to the referral process in terms of how you identify these youths that are in need of, and these families are in need of these types of services, considering the amendments, of course?
Well, the first point, I believe families will still be going to, or parents might still be going to the courts, because that is what is known. You go to the court when you want to send your child to the hostel. So the court is already aware that they are to refer to the Community Rehabilitation Department, our main office in Belize City, or any of the Ministry of Human Development offices across the country, because we have community rehabilitation officers in each district, as well as San Pedro and Independence. So through the courts, the police can also make referrals, and we've also had walk-ins. Parents who just come. We've had we just started a Facebook page. It needs some work, but we're working on it. But we've had people already reach out to us through Facebook messages, and we've engaged them. So we've had persons just voluntarily come in and say, you know, I need help with my child, and you know, so there are several ways, and we'll try to do more in terms of getting our contact information and out there so that parents can access services within the department.
When I heard you speak earlier about some of the offenses that are very aged, I was getting the understanding that these types of offenses will no longer be reflected in the law, but that in fact when these things arise, that some sort of intervention will be put in place. My question, however, is in the case that, and you can offer clarification on that, but in the case that a child actually ends up at the facility, when you speak about a rights-based approach, what are we saying in terms of the level of treatment and the level of engagement that a child will receive at the facility compared to some of the more horrendous stories we've heard of treatment that children actually receive at these facilities? And maybe, Minister, you could pitch into that.
Of course. Yeah. Yes. Let Starla start, and I'll continue. Mm-hmm.
So, like we said, in any system, institutionalization should be the last resort. So it should mean that we have exhausted all other options before a child is placed within the institution. And as Minister rightly said, the period of time that they say should be the shortest period possible. So from the time a child enters the facility, there is a plan, all right? And the plan involves the child, the family, and there are certain goals that are put in place so that we can reintegrate the child back into society. Rights-based means that the child is at the center. It means that the child has a voice. It means that the child's perspective, concerns are heard, are listened to, and are taken into account. It doesn't mean that decisions are being made for him or her without their input. A lot of times, you know, it was age-old, children should be seen and not heard, but we have to include children in their plans because it's theirs, it's their life, and they have to own it. So those are things that we've already been doing. One of the key things that has helped us over the years, I don't want to say it too quickly, but it's been over 2 years since we've had any kind of major incident within the facility, and I have to say that this is because we have an excellent staff. who work with these children. And while we struggle in many other areas, sometimes with resources to deal with some of the infrastructural components, the relationships that these staff build with these children is what is most important.
Yeah.
And we have seen that really help these children move and make progress. So we have a zero tolerance when it comes to abuse. We have a complaints system. We have a social worker who checks in every day with these kids on site, and she checks in with them. So the staff have really done an excellent job of building relationships with these kids, and that's where it starts.
Yeah.
Their dignity and their worth, and listening to them and caring for them. I always tell people, when these children reach the facility, or even before that, any child that we're working with, these are our children. We take ownership of these children.
Yeah.
And just like our own children, when they do behaviors that, we wouldn't want them to do, you don't throw them out.
Yeah.
You work with them. It's a learning process. You have to help them to develop the skills
Yeah.
and knowledge to be able to navigate as adults in this society. So it's always a work in progress.
I'm so glad you said that. Just how times have changed, that we look at children and their behavior, and we don't look at the behavior, we try to understand why, because now we know there's usually something that's taken place.
Correct.
Minister,
yes.
let me put this into
Yes,
perspective
please.
for a bit, because one of the key elements here is one of the things that Starla mentioned, which is working along with other ministries. You have a child who is identified with trouble behavior. You go back, so that's kind of the end result, but really it goes all the way back to the start with the family. Other things that may have been missed during that time: employment opportunities for the parents, access to education or affordability of education, proper housing, whether or not they live in good sheltering, the access to resources in their community, light, water, proper infrastructure, and the list goes on and on. Mm-hmm. So my question is, what is the level of connectivity between ministries? I'll give the example. I know the housing ministry is rolling out their low-income houses. Mm-hmm. How much is the Ministry of Human Development tied to that, if you know that families are in particularly dire situation needing this? We know in 2019 it was confirmed, and this was pre-COVID, over half this country is living in poverty.
Mm-hmm. Well, that is what we are addressing assiduously, if I could put it that way, Paul and Marlene and Starla. I think that there is great room for improvement, mm-hmm. but I can tell you that right now we are focusing for the initial phase of the rollout for the housing on single moms, people in very dire circumstances. And I can tell you there is vigorous discussion as to how we can improve our working together. Yes. Let me go back to the hostel for just a moment. Mm-hmm. I think there's been, as Starla has said, a lot of improvement. Way back in the days, it was more okay. Children must be seen and not heard. Mm-hmm. Now we are really seeing the staff working with the kids, and there's sporting activities. There's arts and crafts. They did some beautiful picture frames, actually made out of bottle stopper, all around on a little kind of little background, and they fold the stoppers and make it look nice and look like a tree or a flower or something like that. I'm really proud of what has been happening. Now, going back to the integration and the cooperation and collaboration. Mm-hmm. Again, what we need is for the ministries to work together, and we're working very, very closely on it. Let me mention the Ministry of Education. Mm-hmm. We're looking with the Ministry of Education on children with special needs. Mm-hmm. We have a disabilities desk now in the ministry, so that we can look at people who need that special help of any person living with disability. And that kind of integrated approach in working with the various ministries. Also, I can't not mention the youth ministry and Minister Kevin Bernard really hitting the ground running in terms of getting everybody involved in helping our young people to come forward. So I think the short answer to the question is it is a work in progress, as has been said, but we really mean to do as best we can to make it happen.
Now, as we said earlier, this is the amendment, the legislative changes will be introduced tomorrow.
Tomorrow, yes.
And then there is the revamp of the hostel itself, which will become a residential care facility. So those are
We're
the major
treating
steps.
it as such,
Okay,
even though we haven't introduced the bill yet, but it'll be tomorrow.
Okay, so this is definitely, I think it was important for us to understand the whys.
Absolutely.
Now, if you just allow me, as we quickly run out of time, to tap into some other areas of your portfolios, the Indigenous Peoples Affairs is definitely something that is still a burning issue here. And we saw last week where the alcalde of Big Falls, came out speaking about representation for him and his own views, or his village's views on how things should proceed. Tell me where we are today from the government standpoint.
Well, we're listening to people, and we're taking an approach of inclusivity. We're listening, we're visiting. We were down in Otosha, we were down in Dolores, we have been to San Antonio, San Pedro, Colombia. We've been really all over. And I think the approach that we have to continue to take is that everybody must be heard. And alcaldes, ex-alcaldes, very, very important role, but these leaders should not speak without consulting with their individual communities. That is pretty much where we are. We're rolling out the approach of the implementation. Cabinet has submitted a draft of the free, prior, informed consent protocol to the Caribbean Court of Justice. We are taking some of the complaints coming from the villages seriously in terms of land matters. And clearly, we will have to find a way to balance the competing interests of those who wish for the customary land rights as opposed to those who may want their lease and their individual titles. But I think the main thing in terms of where we are as a ministry, reaching out, listening to people, knowing that we have to look at the concerns of the Garifuna people, for example. Garifuna Settlement Day coming up in November. We are not here, Cabinet and the government are not here to impose our views on anyone. We will listen as best we can, balance the competing interests, and make sure that everybody is heard in terms of the positions that need to be taken.
When it comes to the free and prior informed consent protocol. Was there consensus?
There were a few little glitches in terms of people's views here and there, but I think maybe where we may have lacked the full consensus, but government is determined, is the issue of representation. Because there is a grouping, the Maya Leaders Alliance, the Toledo Alcaldes Association, and the Julian Cho Society. But there are also other Maya groupings and representative organizations for the Maya people in the South that we believe need to be heard. And I think that Commissioner Greg Chuck has done a really good job of saying and of holding the line that the issue of representation is one that we must respect, but also repeating that the individual villages, in terms of the consensus of the village, need to be heard.
How will that be resolved, the matter of the division among the Maya people where villages are concerned? Because I know that it will also affect the demarcating of lands.
Right. Well, for example, there is an issue right now between Otosha and Corazon, where the people of one village don't really want a demarcation to take place, but the people of the other village would like it. The way that would be resolved, Paul, I believe, would be that there has to be dialogue. There has to be dialogue, bringing people to the table. The boundaries between, say, Barranco and Midway, those are issues that we have to look at. And the only way that I believe we should approach it is for government not to get in there heavy-handed and say, this is what you're going to do, but to listen to the villagers themselves and to play a facilitating role. For example, I can tell you, the people who know about social sciences, anthropology, people will tell you that in Barranco right now, 20% of the village is Maya. So basically what we're saying is, let us not look at the divisions and what divides us in the South, but how we can find common ground to help with the development. And by the way, some people say, and there are two Southern representatives who we have to respect, Honorable Mike Espat and Minister Oscar Requena. Some people will say the FPIC protocol, all the processes that we have to go through may slow development in a district that probably needs it the most. Our approach will have to be, we have to balance, because we cannot afford to slow down development, but at the same time, the requirements, because of the customary land rights having been recognized, the requirements for consultation and for dialogue and for respect will always remain.
And I know that as we run out of time, I know that one of the major concerns for some of these landowners is that their lands are landlocked, in that, and it's an urgent matter for some in that they want to access finances to develop their lands, their farms, for education as well. However, my question here has to do with the Garifuna people and where the conversation is currently as they look to the Maya land rights issue as a way forward for their own issues and for their own advocation.
I think it's an issue again of representation, but also I think that government's responsibility is again respectful engagement, listening to people's concerns, but of course we would not as a government be able to make decisions for how things go forward. For example, in the village of St. Bite, where they want to put a gas station, you have a vocal minority who are agitating against. But when you look at really what's happening on the ground, a majority of the residents of the village would like for the development to go forward. So I think it is a matter of not rushing into anything, and government, we ourselves see that the Ministry of Indigenous Peoples Affairs is something that we have to develop in terms of the roles of the portfolio, and clearly we will have to come up with some government policies. You know, that again is something that we will need to look at, you know?
And if I could just get one comment as we wrap up, because we are heading into November where we're going to be talking about gender-based violence, and we know that domestic abuse is still a very challenging issue in this country.
Huge topic.
Also in your responsibility.
Huge topic, and I really would like Starla to come in on this.
Jump in and tell us,
maybe you can go first, Starla, and I'll wrap up, you know? Yeah, for the gender-based violence issues and other issues. Right. Okay.
Well, certainly the ministry continues to work very closely along with the National Women's Commission. I know that there's the gender-based violence plan of action, and there's been a lot of work in terms of trying to change the culture, because certain issues certain social issues, the root of it is the social norms, and those are often the most difficult to change. And so that's the foundation. I think moving forward, a lot of focus will be on integrated services and working to change some of the cultural norms and practices, and getting people to understand the impacts that these types of issues like gender-based violence has on the society, not just on the victim or the survivor, but on the entire family and society. So the Spotlight Initiative through the UN agencies, I know our CEO, Tanya Santos, she's a key part of that initiative, and it is doing wonderful work in terms of trying to break down some of the social what's some of the social norms
Yeah,
that
stereotypes.
really, and working with masculinity and really bringing men into being partners in this, you know. So there's a lot on the table, Marlene and Paul.
Yeah.
Right. And then if I could add, thank you, Starla. Then if I could add, we're working very hard along with the special envoy for the development of families and children. Rosanna Briceño has been a champion so far, and we rely on her a lot. As a matter of fact, just last week, we were in a Zoom forum on the domestic violence issue, and it is something that we will continue to give a lot of attention to. Thea Garcia Ramirez and Cynthia Williams, you know, at the Women's Commission, are absolutely committed. There are committees in San Pedro and Kikocker. We're trying to roll it out throughout the country as well. But you can be assured that we are working hard on the 16 days of activism, and we will continue to give the issue of interpersonal violence, it's called sometimes, intimate partner violence, and domestic violence, gender-based violence. We will give special attention going forward to making sure that this is front and center of our agenda, because it is so very, very important. So I'm glad you asked that before the show came to an end, you know. Yes.
There's lots more.
There's a lot more.
We could ask you about how you feel about trade licensing in
Oh
Lakeville.
That's for the next show. That's for
We'll
the
get to
next
that.
show, yes.
But we do thank you for coming on set this morning, Starla, as well, for
Yes.
helping us understand the removal of the uncontrollable behavior.
Right. And the certified
offense,
institution, yes.
These are
right.
major steps in terms of looking at how our children go through systems and end up in systems. So we wanted more clarity. Thank you for coming in. Stay safe.
Yes, yes.
All right. And with
Thank you, Starla. Thank you, Paul. Thank you,
Take care.
Marlene. And
right.
I will continue to try to stay strong among you young people.
All right. And with
Thank
that,
you.
we are going to go ahead and take a break. When we come back, we'll be talking about the influence of the media portrayal on Belizean identity formation. That's coming up in a few. Stay tuned.